I sensed the wrongness before I even killed the engine. The cabin should have been quiet, sealed tight against the Montana winter, but instead, the metal screen door kept slapping against the frame, slow, uneven blows carried by the wind, the kind that make your stomach tighten before your mind catches up. The porch light above me sputtered in a sickly amber pulse, just enough to show a trail of bare footprints pressed into the snow. They dragged rather than stepped, smudged at the toes like someone had been losing balance. I didn't shout his name. After 6 months in the desert, your instincts return whether you ask for them or not. Observe, breathe, step carefully. I pushed the front door open with 2 fingers. The hinge complained sharply, and a gust of cold swept past me, carrying with it the smell of wet wood and something metallic underneath. Snow had blown halfway across the living room floor, gathering in small white ridges. The window beside the door was cracked shards glittering faintly along the sill. My boots made a dull crunch with every step. Then I saw him, my grandfather Arthur Ellison, 86 years old, Marine Corps engineer before I was even born, crawling toward the kitchen table with a stubbornness that looked more painful than determined. He wasn't even on his knees anymore, just pulling himself forward by his fingertips. Blood-dried and rust-colored streaked across his knuckles. His breath floated in thin clouds. He didn't speak when he looked up at me. His eyes did the talking surprise first, then relief, then something I can only describe as apology. I slid an arm around his back, feeling the sharpness of his shoulder blades through his shirt. His skin was cold enough to sting my palm. That's when I saw the note on the counter, a torn piece of lined paper weighed down by an empty mug. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, hurried, careless. Mara, we're off to Vegas with a business partner. The old man was too much trouble. Handle it if you can. Linda. I didn't need to touch it to feel the blow. Someone hadn't just abandoned him. They walked away expecting he wouldn't survive the night. I kept one arm braced around my grandfather as I eased him into the nearest chair, a wooden one he'd sanded himself years ago. It creaked under his weight, the sound thin and uneasy, like even the furniture knew what had happened here. His breathing hitched each time the cold air moved across the room. I pulled my field jacket around his shoulders, letting the warmth seep in slowly. His fingers twitched against the fabric, not gripping, just searching for something steady. Easy, Grandpa? I murmured, checking the pulse at his wrist. It fluttered weakly, irregular, like a radio signal cutting in and out. His lips barely moved, but the words still found me. Linda and Tyler took the pills. Took cash, Jonas said. Good job. The name hit me hard enough that I stopped moving for a second. Jonas wasn't someone spoken lightly about in these parts. I bit down on the thought and focused on the room instead. A soldier learns early that the details will tell you the truth, long before a person will. I crossed to the breaker panel near the hallway and flipped each switch until the bulbs overhead hummed back to life. The light wasn't kind. It revealed everything. The medicine drawer hung crooked, its contents spilled across the floor in a mess of empty bottles and torn labels. The safe beneath the bookshelf lay open, its door resting against a pile of scattered envelopes. Someone had stepped on them repeatedly, the edges were bent, the ink smudged as if under a wet shoe. The security monitor by the window sat dark, its cables neatly sliced. Not yanked cut. A deliberate hand. One that didn't worry about being careful because they believed no one would be back for a while. As I moved closer, my boots slid across something glossy. A photograph. Its edges curled from moisture, but the image was clear. Tyler standing shoulder to shoulder with Jonas Creed, both of them on the ridge overlooking our family forest. Tyler wore a smile I hadn't seen on him in years, confident, almost proud. The kind of smile a person has when they think they've already gotten away with something. I felt my jaw tighten as I held the photo up to the lamp. A date stamp glowed faintly in the corner, taken while I'd still been on deployment. They hadn't even waited for me to return. And as I stood there, the house humming faintly back to life, one quiet truth settled in my chest with a weight I couldn't ignore. They hadn't stumbled into trouble. They'd walked straight into it and dragged my grandfather with them. I stayed beside my grandfather as the house settled into a low electrical hum, the kind of sound that makes silence feel alive. The lamp above us flickered, casting soft bands of gold across his face while I cleaned the cuts on his hands. His skin was thin as paper, the kind that wrinkles under the gentlest touch. I wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, easing warm water past his lips in small, steady sips. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was only the quiet rhythm of his breath and the wind tapping against the broken window. When his fingers finally curled around mine, it wasn't for comfort, it was for confession. "They want the forest," he whispered, voice catching like a branch under frost. "The land your father left us. They tried to make me sign. Jonas brought a notary." Tyler said, "Just sign and it'll be over." His grip tightened, not strong but desperate, like someone holding on to the last solid thing in the room. I felt the weight of his words settle through me the way cold settles into old timber. I kept my face still the way soldiers do when the truth arrives faster than emotion. Inside, a quiet understanding formed. This wasn't about negligence anymore. It was about intent. He spoke in broken lines after that soft, scattered like leaves drifting across the cabin floor. Jonas wanted 60 acres of family forest to build a luxury lodge, or so he claimed. But locals had whispered for months that the lodge was just a cover for illegal mineral extraction buried beneath our ridge. Linda and Tyler, he said, had been promised a share if they got his signature. As he talked, his breathing grew steadier, almost as if finally being heard was its own medicine. I listened without interrupting, feeling the familiar discipline settle across my shoulders. Observe, now react later. When he drifted into a shallow sleep, I stood and crossed to the safe beneath the bookshelf. The air smelled of dust and cold metal as I knelt. Papers lay scattered from earlier edges, bent ink smeared. I gathered what remained and laid them on the table beneath the lamp. That's when I saw it, a land transfer contract bearing my grandfather's signature, the strokes shaky, but unmistakably not his. A notary stamp marked the bottom corner, one I recognized from local gossip, a man previously investigated for fraud, the kind who signed anything if the price was right. I traced a finger along the forged signature, feeling my jaw tighten the way it always did before training kicked in. And in that quiet, lamplit moment, the truth crystallized with a sharpness that cut deeper than any winter wind. This wasn't a contract. It was a fake signed under coercion. I stayed at the table a long time after discovering the forged contract, letting the lamp's warm glow settle over the papers like a thin layer of truth no one could deny anymore. The house had gone quiet again, just the slow tick of the wall clock and the low whistle of wind sneaking through the cracked window. My grandfather slept in the chair behind me, his breathing shallow but steadier now wrapped in my field jacket. I tightened the belt around my waist, a habit more than anything, and made the call I knew had to come next. When you've been in uniform long enough, you learn the difference between accidents and operations. This, what I saw tonight, was the latter. Deputy Carter Miles answered on the second ring. His voice carried the rough edge of someone who'd spent too many winters on these back roads, steady but suspicious by nature. I explained what I found: Jonas, the notary, the forged signature, the broken security lines. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that tells you a man is already standing up, already reaching for his jacket. "Send me photos," he said. "I'll check the highway cams." I heard a drawer slam, boots scraping the floor, the rustle of a heavy coat. It grounded me more than I expected. Within 20 minutes, Miles called back. The urgency in his breath carried through the speaker like he'd jogged to his cruiser. "I got them," he said. Linda's SUV, Tyler in the passenger seat, and Jonas following behind in that lifted Ford of his. All heading toward Timberline Lodge. Timberline locals whispered about it the way miners once talked about dangerous shafts, a place where mountain deals were made in the dark, no questions asked. I felt my hand close around the edge of the table, the wood cool and familiar. Trouble wasn't just close, it had already crossed the threshold. While Miles pulled additional footage, my phone buzzed again, this time a message instead of a call. The screen lit the room in a blue flicker. A single line from an untraceable number. "If you want to save the old man, go to cabin 7, don't bring the police." The words hung there sharp as the winter air slipping under the doorframe. Someone was watching. Someone who knew more than they should. I stared at the message, feeling the quiet weight of a decision settle across my chest. Then another realization followed, quieter but sharper. Someone inside their operation wasn't trying to stop me, they were trying to help. The message sat on my screen like a held breath, and for a long moment I simply listened to the wind scraping along the siding of the cabin back home. My grandfather stirred in his sleep, a soft, weak exhale that reminded me why hesitation was a luxury I didn't have. I wrote a quick note for Deputy Miles, nothing detailed, just enough so he'd come looking if things went sideways, and tucked it under the edge of the radio. Then I pulled on my boots, the leather stiff from years of sand and rain, and stepped out into the Montana night. The cold hit with the blunt honesty of a rifle butt. Snow carried the storm's glow, a pale blue shimmer guiding me along the tree line toward Cabin 7. Every crunch beneath my boots sounded louder than it should. Every shadow looked like a memory trying to warn me. Cabin 7 sat half buried in drifts, lit only by the storm flashing against its windows. No lamps inside, just the pulse of lightning washing the walls in white, and then letting them sink back into darkness. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, no lock, no resistance. Inside, the air smelled of cold smoke and damp wool. 2 suitcases lay open on the floor, stuffed with cash, held together by rubber bands, bills fanned out like someone had been counting in a hurry. Fake passports were stacked beside them, Linda and Tyler both, with fresh photos, both already stamped with fictitious entry dates. On the table lay my grandfather's handwritten will torn straight down the center, the ink feathered from someone's grip. Beside it sat a finalized land contract, wrong birth year, wrong middle initial, wrong everything. A document made by people who didn't care about the truth because they never expected anyone to check. A drawer hung crooked along the wall. Something metallic caught the lightning. I slid it open and found a USB drive small enough to swallow. My thumb hesitated over the casing, just one breath before training pushed me forward. The laptop on the counter still had power. I plugged the USB in. The footage loaded instantly. No sound at first, just the storm outside. Then Tyler came into frame, shoving my grandfather hard enough that his knees buckled. Linda's laugh echoed behind the camera, sharp and bright like glass breaking. Jonas stepped forward, his shadow cutting across the room as he said almost casually, "Old bones break easy. Makes signing quicker." My jaw locked so tight I felt it in my ears. I paused the footage when something bright streaked across the lower corner, blood. Fresh, then dark now. I lowered my gaze to the real floorboards beneath my boots. A thin trail of dried blood led out the back door. And it wasn't my grandfather's. Someone else had been here hurt, maybe taken and missing before I ever arrived. I followed the line of dried blood only far enough to know it trailed into the trees, then stopped myself. Cabin 7 had already shown me more truth than most men ever see in daylight, and wandering blindly into the storm wasn't strategy, it was desperation. I stepped back inside, letting the door shut against the wind, and slipped the USB into my pocket. The cabin hummed with generator power. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, a dull vibration that made the suitcases rattle softly. I took one steady breath, the kind drilled into you during fire missions, slow inhale, slower release, and called Deputy Miles. My voice stayed even. Training keeps you calm long after your heart wants to race. He didn't question my tone, just told me to send the drive straight to federal intake. "They'll move faster than the county ever could," he said, and I could hear him pacing the crunch of gravel under his boots. I uploaded the files through the secure channel he texted me, the progress bar crawling across the phone like a patient heartbeat. Outside, lightning flickered again, washing the room in white. It made the ripped will glow like something ancient and wounded. For a moment, I let my eyes rest on my grandfather's handwriting, the loops he always made on his capital A's, the careful slant of his E's. That paper should have been his protection. Instead, it had been torn into a weapon. The response from federal authorities came faster than I expected. Miles called back, his voice low, almost disbelieving. "They ran the footage," he said. "The lodge is a shell. Cross-border smuggling, illegal mining. Jonas is mid-tier in a much bigger ring." I pressed my fingers against the edge of the suitcase, feeling the rubber bands bite into my palm. He continued, "Linda and Tyler acted as local facilitators. The notary's been bribed in multiple cases. They tied everything together the moment you sent that USB. I didn't speak. The truth doesn't need commentary. It lands whether you want it to or not." But Miles wasn't finished. His voice shifted softer, heavier. "Mara, there's something else. They found documents Jonas prepared months ago. Not about the forest. About your home. The one your father left you." I felt something cold move through me, colder than the Montana night pressing against the cabin walls. He kept talking, each word a quiet strike. He forged deployment records, created transfer papers. They were getting ready to sell the house, too. I leaned against the table, steadying myself with one hand. The lamp beside me buzzed and dimmed as if the storm outside had pulled the light backward for a moment. And in that small flicker of darkness, I understood the truth fully, cleanly, painfully. They hadn't just tried to erase my grandfather's legacy. They were preparing to erase every piece of my family's history, including the part that was mine alone. I left Cabin 7 with the storm at my back, the USB warm in my pocket like something alive. The cold didn't bite the way it usually did. Adrenaline has a way of dulling the weather. As I walked to the truck, I caught my reflection in the window, ice crusted along my collar jaw, set harder than I remembered. Part of me wanted to drive straight home, sit beside my grandfather, and pretend the world outside hadn't shifted overnight. But the truth doesn't wait. It doesn't soften. It demands an answer. I typed the message with steady thumbs. Meet me at the cemetery. I know everything. The cemetery sat on a ridge overlooking the valley, the same place my grandmother was buried 20 years ago. Snow drifted sideways across the headstone, settling on my boots as I stood at her grave. The chapel bell rang, the hour its echo rolling through the pines like a reminder of every promise our family had ever broken or kept. I rested one hand on the cold granite marker, letting the silence settle somewhere deep. Sometimes stillness is the only armor left. Headlights cut through the storm, bouncing off the wrought iron gate. Tyler stepped out first, shoulders hunched, eyes darting. Linda followed, wrapped in a coat too thin for the weather mascara already smudged from nerves. Jonas came last. He didn't rush, just walked with the calm arrogance of a man convinced things always fall his way. They stood a few yards from me, breath rising in pale clouds. I laid everything out on the stone bench beside my grandmother's grave, the USB, the forged contracts, the shredded pieces of my grandfather's will, the photos with the notary, the federal report printed in harsh black ink. Paper doesn't lie, even when people do. Jonas stepped forward, snow crunching under his boots. And what he said? Voice cutting through the wind. You think anyone will believe you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Behind him, the storm shifted just slightly, and shapes emerged from the drifting white. Deputy Miles Hood pulled tight, 2 federal agents flanking him. Their badges caught the lantern light and flashed gold against the snow. Linda panicked first. Her voice cracked as she pointed at Tyler. It was his idea. He handled everything. Tyler shot back instantly, blaming Jonas, his words tumbling into the wind. Jonas didn't wait. He bolted between the gravestone's boots, slipping, breath sharp. But the agents were faster. They took him down so cleanly the snow barely scattered. And there, among the markers of my family's past, the truth settled where it belonged, revealed in the very place our history rests. After the arrests, the storm finally broke. The morning light came slow, silver, and cautious, as if the valley itself needed time to believe what had happened. I drove home in that quiet snow, lifting off the pines in soft plumes as the sun warmed them. My grandfather was waiting inside the cabin, propped in his chair, wrapped in the thick wool blanket he'd had since my father was a boy. His recovery was slow, every step, measured every breath careful, but his eyes were clearer than I'd seen in years. I knelt beside him to feed the fire, the smell of pine resin rising as the logs caught. Healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes gently, inch by inch. A month passed, like that small routine's steady days. I repaired the broken window, replaced the torn hinges, and scrubbed the last of the blood from the floorboards. Outside, snow draped the forest in white folds, softening the edges of everything. Inside, warmth built itself back into the cabin, one fire, one meal, one shared silence at a time. My grandfather spent his afternoons tracing the grain in the wooden table, the one my father had carved. Sometimes he spoke. Mostly, he rested in the kind of peace a man earns after being forced too close to the edge. One evening, as the firelight flickered against the log walls, he reached for my hand. His grip was weak but steady. Mara, he whispered, voice low enough that it blended with the crackle of the flames, you didn't just save the land. You saved what your father left in this world. I swallowed once, feeling the words settle into the quiet places inside me. I'd been trained to protect borders, missions, people, but this was different. This was the kind of duty no uniform prepares you for. Outside, snow drifted across the forest in slow spirals, catching the moonlight like silver dust. I watched it settle on the branches, the same land my father walked, the same ridge where generations of our family had stood and worked and hoped. The truth came to me the way winter light does. Soft but undeniable. Family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who refuses to abandon you in the dark. And if you'll allow me, one last thought spoken gently. At any age, we all deserve kindness and dignity. If this story reminded you of someone who once stood by you in hard times, feel free to share their name in the comments as a tribute. And if you believe that goodness still deserves to be told, you're welcome to subscribe so we can keep these healing stories alive together.